morning. Everybody able to hear me at the back with the microphone? Good. Welcome to our January MP Breakfast Connections. Thank you for joining us here. I want to wish you a happy new year as it's still January. And I'm just delighted to be here and back in the flow of activities. I think the last time we chatted, or the guests at the breakfast, I may have mentioned that I was going to COP24 in Katowice, Poland. So that was a very interesting week. I was the head of the Canadian delegation for that week, because I was the senior political figure, and the next week Catherine McKenna was the senior political figure. So I just wanted to touch into that. One, because I wanted to say a couple of words about it. It was not that clear in the press, I think, after COP24, what happened, what was accomplished, what moved forward. And I think the key thing that we, Canada, and the global partners were aiming to do was to create a rule book that would map out exactly what was the accountability for the targets that have been voluntary targets that nations have put forward. So this is in contradistinction to the Kyoto Protocol, in which there were legally binding targets that were assigned to countries based on various elements of their situation, and with penalties, major penalties for non-compliance. And as we know, that particular framework didn't endure, so it was resisted heavily by many countries for many reasons. This is more of a voluntary compliance approach, but there is a great deal more transparency and reporting, and essentially agreements on the rules of the road for making the reductions. What didn't happen is there were some countries and some organizations that were advocating for toughening up the voluntary targets that countries had set to ensure that we achieve a 1.5 degree maximum warming rather than 2 degrees, and that did not get consensus. I was at one very moving event, which was the negotiation group that was negotiating Indigenous participation in the Indigenous chapter of the agreement and of the Paris Agreement, which was successful at the end of week one. What you want is all of the various trains of work that are being done by officials over the course of the whole year at meetings in different places that come together at a conference of parties. What ideally happens is that the disagreements amongst the countries have been ironed out, and by the time the ministers come, they're just there really to network and iron out a few last things and come to agreement. So the Aboriginal chapter was a very moving meeting with the negotiators, in which the Indigenous representatives and the countries that had been leading the charge on that negotiation were very emotional about the empowerment of First Nations and the ability to get everybody on board to an approach that was satisfying to Indigenous peoples around the world. So the key thing about the Paris, the UN conference, is that everything has to be done by consensus. So nothing goes ahead if even one country is saying no, which makes it an interesting time. One of the things that I was there for was to work on greening government, which some of you will know. I was the architect of Canada's greening government program, which is now called the Centre for Greening Government, and it's within the Treasury Board. And so I wanted to go to Katowice to meet with leaders who were working on common projects that we're working on. Greening government has taken up the baton on plastics in the ocean, for example, by making a commitment to eliminating unnecessary single-use plastics by all government operations and cafeterias and events across the country, and a few other things. I won't get into the details. And so one of the things that we're working on now is greening procurement. We're the biggest purchaser in the country as a federal government, of course. So how do you green your procurement? And so learning about the circular economy, the lead is Finland. So I had a chance to meet with the minister from Finland and create the bridges so that when I came back to Canada, we have some connections and we can learn from what they've been doing for 20 years to really embed this idea of the circular economy throughout all of the country. And so they're really leading on that. Thank you. So it was pretty exciting to be there, and I just wanted mention one other very fulfilling aspect of being there. I've always wanted to go and visit Auschwitz-Birkenau. So how many people in the room have had a chance to make that pilgrimage? So I played hooky for a half a day from my responsibilities as head of delegation and went with 2 staff people and spent a half day at Auschwitz-Birkenau. So I won't get into more about that right now, but what I will mention is that Sunday is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I had a chance to speak on behalf of Canada at a commemorative event at the Hillel House out at UBC yesterday. We'll be posting a transcript of that or possibly a video of that on my website. So if you're interested in participating in Holocaust Remembrance Day in any way, that's one thing that one choice you can make. So, and one last intro to the topic that we have today, which I have been really interested in and committed to for many years. So I'm not sure if anyone in the room was at one of my consultations on on a national integrated food policy for Canada, which I started doing 10 years ago when I was first an MP, hosting discussions at places like the UBC Forum and others, hosting discussions with Vancouver City's food policy people and so on. Was anybody in any of those consultations? Okay, Carl. So I worked with a small group of Liberal MPs. We based what we were doing on a 4-pillar approach, which we borrowed from Scotland's National Food and Drink Policy process, which was just underway at the time, their consultations. And I then wrote a platform, platform 2-pager, and submitted it for our 2011 platform. And it was in our platform, and it was again in the 2015 platform that Canada would develop an integrated national food policy. So the minister's been working on that. I think it's a bit more complicated than it seems on the surface, and so it has not come out the gate. There's been quite a bit of consultation, and I'm going to be looking into what stage is it at, but we may not have something to announce sooner. So this has been really a deep interest, and it's a deep interest of so many people in Vancouver, because I had more interest in those consultations at that time than I expected. And I also had the privilege of going to places like Iqaluit and Montreal and being asked to do some consultations on a national integrated food policy. So that brings us to today. And we are delighted that there is someone who has taken the time to do a PhD on how do you deal with the food waste problem in a systematic and systemic way. And so when I saw a note in the newspapers about Tammara, I thought, I think there are people that might be interested in what she has to say. So I'll just give you a bit of background on Tammara. Dr. Tammara Soma holds a PhD in planning from the University of Toronto and is the research director and co-founder of the Food Systems Lab. She's an assistant professor at the School of Environmental Management at SFU, where she conducts research on issues pertaining to food system planning, community-based research, waste management, and the circular economy. Dr. Soma I'll be talking with you more about that. So Dr. Soma is the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation doctoral scholar in 2015 2018, and she co-founded the International Food Loss and Food Waste Studies Group, the first academic network of global food waste scholars. So I really appreciate you coming to speak with us. Let's welcome Tammara.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yes. That's wonderful. Okay, so thank you so much, Joyce, for inviting me, and Kaylee, and everyone for coming on Friday morning. My goodness. And I hope you didn't waste your food today, because I'll be watching. I know Joyce already did an acknowledgement, but I would like to once again do an acknowledgement because I am new to this territory. So I acknowledge that I am of the land, the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. And it's very important for me to acknowledge that because basically I moved here to BC in November, so I am very new here. I lived for 17 years in Toronto, the dish with one spoon territory. And by the way, what a beautiful image, a dish with one spoon. We're all supposed to share. And prior to Toronto, I was actually born and raised in Indonesia. And food waste and food is very important for me because in Indonesia, for me at least in my island, I'm from the Sundanese tribe, rice is my identity. So my identity revolves around food and eating. That's why it's so important. So anyway, I might be a stranger for most of you, but I hope we can change that today. Again, my name is Tammara Soma, and I am at SFU. I'm very proud to be here. And I self-identify as a food systems planner. How many of you have heard, food systems planner? Okay, that's great. So basically, a food systems planner is a planner that integrates food systems consideration into planning and policy and decision making. So that's kind of my job, which is really fun. So let's get to the presentation. And as you can see here in my title, I'm very sorry about this. Food waste in Canada, a $31 billion problem and counting, $49 billion asterisk as of January 17, 2019. And sorry, this might be pessimistic, or I hope it doesn't, create depression, and concern so much in the morning. But indeed, it is a growing problem. But the thing is, whether or not we're dealing with a $31 billion problem or a $49 billion problem, what I do find in common is that food, at least in the literature, in policy, in conversation, it's usually talked about as a commodity. Food as a commodity. So I want to share a story that might change your mind a little bit about this. So here is my colleague. He is also a former Pierre Elliott Trudeau scholar in my cohort. His name is Aaron Mills, Dr. Aaron Mills. He did his PhD at the University of Victoria, and he's Anishinaabe from the Couchiching First Nation. So we were at a conference together, and how many of you have ever been to a conference? Okay, so you know that time at like 2 or 3 p.m. when you've eaten a big lunch, right? So I did, I'm sorry, but I ate a lot, and basically he was due to talk, and I was sitting in my chair, just kind of like starting to doze off and really being slouchy. And then he stood up to the podium, and imagine someone 3 times taller than me, so like all the way up. So he opened his arms wide, and he said, "Greetings to all my relations." And immediately, I stood. I didn't stand up, but I sat straighter. It is such a powerful principle. All my relations, and I've never heard about that before, coming from Indonesia. When he said, and he greeted a room full of strangers with all my relations, and when I got a chance to learn more about this particular principle, he said that this principle is not just about, human to human relations, because we're all, in a way related, but this also is connected to how human and non-human relations treat one another. So plant, food, animals, they are also relations. So when I thought about this and this principle, then I asked the question, what does it really mean if we stop thinking of food as a commodity and we start thinking of food as relations? What does it mean if we waste our relations? That has a different ring to it, right? why we're all here today is to learn about food waste. Or maybe you're all very knowledgeable about food waste. But the reason why it's so critical and so dire is because of the scenario that I would call the perfect storm. And if in your mind you start thinking of George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg on a boat, I'm not talking about that perfect storm, although I do recommend the movie. But this perfect storm is a scenario that is not really about science fiction or fiction. It's basically a perfect storm of increasing food scarcity, coupled with an increasing water scarcity. Add to that a perfect storm of conflict and tension and riots, which leads to further migration and refugees that are fleeing from all of these dire circumstances. And in this perfect storm, this might coalesce into a large global war. And I'm just going to pause here because this is quite frightening. But the thing is, again, just to remind you that this perfect storm, this scenario, is not based on science fiction. This perfect storm scenario is basically, it was coined by Sir John Bennington, who was the former UK Chief Scientific Advisor. And what he mentioned, and what his projection is that by 2030, we need to produce 50% more food, we will need 50% more energy, and 30% more water to feed 9 billion people. And what he's saying that if we don't address the situation, we would have that perfect storm. But just to pause on that, right? Currently, at this moment right now, this very moment, we actually grow enough food to feed anywhere between 10 to 12 billion people. So right now we have about 7 billion people, right? So we actually produce more than enough food. The question is then, do we really need to produce more food? But the thing is, as according to the United Nations, a Food and Agriculture Organization, anywhere between 30 to 50% of the food that we produce globally is wasted to the tune of $1 trillion. $1 trillion. And now, as I mentioned again in Canada, it's $49 billion wasted, while 1 in 8 Canadian families are food insecure. So you have this paradox. On the one side, there's so much waste, and on the other side, there's also a lot of food insecurity and poverty. And why is food waste important to climate change specifically is because when food is basically shipped to the landfill or dumped in landfill, it generates methane gas, and methane gas is 20 to 25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And in fact, if you've heard of this project called Project Drawdown, and it has a list of all the different ways that you can do, individuals can do to address climate change, the third highest thing you can do is to reduce food waste. So that's something very tangible, something that actually is very doable to address food waste. But why is it so difficult to solve? Why do I need a PhD? Why do people need a PhD on food waste? I don't know. Don't say that to University of Toronto because they gave you but it is such a difficult problem to solve, and I'm going to explain to you why and some of the reasons. So tomato, potato. I learned about that in a movie somewhere. Harry Met Sally, right? So what is food and what is waste? People like, food is food. What are you talking about? What is food and what is waste? I think it's very important. So let's talk about what is food waste. So from an academic definition, any discarded organic matter that was intended for consumption by humans, regardless of its ultimate fate, if it's discarded, then it's food waste, right? But the thing is, there are so many different terminologies. There's avoidable food waste, non-avoidable food waste, potentially avoidable food waste, and you're probably getting a migraine headache right now. But let's kind of do an exercise. Well, how many of you, broccoli stalks? Broccoli stalks can be considered potentially avoidable food waste because a lot of people don't eat broccoli stalks. In fact, I was quite surprised when I attended supermarkets. A lot of the broccoli is just a crown. What happened to the stalk? In my culture, we eat broccoli stalks. It's just what you do. If you eat meat, How many of you would eat intestine satay? So good, intestine. So the thing is, if you really think about it, right? We eat chicken, we eat beef, but what is happening to all the insides, right? And in fact, from a cultural reason, for many cultures, that's a delicacy. It's, you eat an animal, you eat every part of it, right? So nothing goes to waste. How many? What do you think that is on the top right corner? Corn. Yes. Yes. Exactly. So if you've ever been to Mexico, this is called huitlacoche. And huitlacoche is basically corn that has been infested by fungus. It's infested. And in fact, so there's a big story about it where a farmer in the United States, he just broke down because he saw that his cornfield was infested by this particular fungus. But then he met someone who said, oh my goodness, you go talk to the Mexican restaurant, they will pay for that. That is actually really, really good. So again, right, one is food and one is waste. Now, to the left side, do you know the Muffin Man? There was actually a Muffin Man case in Belgium. So what happened was, a homeless man by the name of Stephen de Guyns, he actually went to the back of a supermarket and took 2 bags of muffin. Well, he was apprehended. He went to court, and they in fact sentenced him to 6 months in jail for taking 2 bags of muffin that were thrown out in the back of the store. Thankfully, an appeal, got him acquitted. But then what the judge said that was very, very clear: just because something has been disposed or discarded and it's waste, it doesn't mean that you can take it. That is still theft. So again, check it out, the Muffin Man case. So because this is a short talk and it's such a complex problem, I'm just going to talk and kind of go over 3 solutions. And these are probably the 3 solutions that we are very familiar with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about, the opportunities and a lot of the great things about the solutions, but then also show you some of the limitations to explain to you why this is such a complex problem. So let's talk about the first one. From 2010 all the way to 2019, January 16th, okay? Everyone was blaming the consumer. 47%, you are the problem. Consumers are the culprit. The food waste that is generated is the consumer's fault. Look at it, 47%. Big chunk of the pie, right? So, in fact, there's also average Canadian households throwing out $1,500 worth of food. There's this image, basically, if you go to the supermarket and you carry 4 bags, you might as well just leave 1 bag in the parking lot because that's the amount that people usually waste. It's not a policy recommendation, okay? That's kind of just to visualize it. And so the idea is, consumers have a lack of knowledge, they have a lack of awareness, they have a lack of concern about food and its value. But then, so what happened? When you have this kind of focus on blaming the consumer, then of course, it makes sense to inform and educate and create awareness, which is all important and all necessary. And this is why the Love Food Hate Waste campaign, why it started in 2007 in the UK, because it wants to help raise awareness and educate households on how to tackle food waste. Oh, and by the way, I was very jealous that they had all these, beautiful posters of broccoli lovers. So if you look like a broccoli, don't waste broccoli. If you look like a potato, if you look like a chicken, I'm not a food waste person. Why did I get a commercial? So I thought to myself, what do I look like? I look like a wrap or a burrito. So wrap lovers, food waste. And the thing is, with these education campaigns, it is very, very critical because, first of all, you're starting to raise the awareness and try to help customers or consumers understand, what they're doing. And it's grown big, obviously, because you've probably heard of the Love Food Hate Waste campaign here, right? It's been franchised to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And so the focus of these types of campaign is to teach people how to love your leftovers. It teaches people about meal planning, shopping with a list. By the way, I shop with a list. It doesn't mean I stick with it, right? And also understanding best before date, which can be very, very confusing. So all good, but there are limitations to this. And this limitation to this particular intervention is what I would say is in the theoretical kind of world is about this value action gap, right? So in this one cliff, you have people aware and educated, and they say we care about food waste, but on the other side of this other cliff is about people's action, what they actually do. You can care about organic food, you can care about fair trade, you can care about sustainability, but it does not necessarily mean that individuals will actually do or walk the talk, right? So there's a value action gap. Another thing, in the UK, it has shown that in fact household food waste is getting worse in spite of all of the money and investment put into it. And in fact, they mentioned that the rise of the decrease of the food waste, there's this connection with recession and food prices. Well, when food prices are more expensive or when there's a recession, people hold on tighter to their money and they waste less. But then as soon as things get back to normal, they start spending again. And so there was that increase in food waste. Now, second one. So as of 5 minutes, okay. As of January 17, 2019, and I'm just going to keep on counting this date, January 17, 2019, suddenly the food industry is to blame, right? So instead of the consumer, 47%, 86% of the food waste generated is actually coming from the food sector. And consumers are now only 14%. Big difference, 47%, 14%. So now the conversation is really around trying to get food sectors and industry to really get their acts together and reduce food waste and prevent food waste. So this is, again, if you want to see the report, is a Value Chain Management International, and Second Harvest. So what are the interventions, right? When we're talking about the food sector and the amount that is wasted in the food sector, the intervention is a focus on food redistribution or a ban on supermarkets dumping edible food. This is a picture of Second Harvest. Second Harvest is one of the largest food rescue organizations in Canada. They're doing a lot of great work. In 34 years, they have rescued 140 million pounds of food. That's a lot of food being rescued. And in fact, what we would like to kind of think about is why is it that perfectly edible food has been categorized as waste? Why? And that's a perfect picture. This is actually a picture of a freegan, a dumpster diver, who went and dumpster dived and found all of these perfectly edible food, right? And just posted with a picture. However, this particular solution is not without limitation, and there are challenges and barriers to this. So, of course, the concern with this particular type of intervention is that we might be creating a two-tiered food system, right? A food system where some people have the choice and have the luxury and can choose what they want to eat. They'll check the best before date. Well, I don't want to eat something that's 1 year after the best before date. But then on the other side, there's also the concern that when we're constantly focusing on getting corporations to move around their quote-unquote waste and push it on charity, that this might create an unfair burden to charities who are already overburdened and do not have the amount of resources and infrastructure and labor. A lot of them are reliant on volunteer laborers to sort. So here are some, of course, a big article that came out, an opinion article, is by Nick Saul and Raj Patel, and they're both anti-poverty activists. And what they're saying is, we need to really stop conflating this food waste and food security angle. It does not make sense to say, well, give the food waste to low-income communities, and they're right. In another sense, there's another picture of sometimes the things that are distributed are not of good quality, so they're not, healthy, nutritious food. They're junk food, and that's a concern. And then this is a photo from the CBC, and one of the things that's very important is to also remember that when food banks or food charities are being given with all this surplus food, in many cases when they have to sort out, they might have to then be responsible for throwing the things that their clients can actually, use. So this is one of the limitations. The third third solution, and this is landfill ban and diversion. So this, oh my gosh, I love this advertising campaign. Hey, food isn't garbage. My kids love this one. So an organic ban in City of Vancouver introduced in 2015, and amazing, in terms of like what it's doing for other municipalities. Vancouver is definitely an inspiration for a lot of other municipalities. So there's been a 30% increase in food waste composted, organics found in garbage decreased by 9%. So it's on track. And then basically Vancouver, City of Vancouver leads all of Canada for organic diversion. Amazing. But again, this is, there are limitations, again, that we need to consider, because diversion, so diverting food from being dumped in the landfill, does not really address the root cause. It does not address prevention or food waste reduction. And if you see this upside down triangle, that was is a kind of a diagram by the Environmental Protection Agency. The first thing that we want to do always is to reduce at the source, so to prevent from having to deal with food waste to begin with. So one of the limitations with these types of policy is that, of course, there's a difference. There's an inequality between single-family homes and multi-family residential. I just spent months and months doing waste audits in multi-residential family apartments in Toronto, and the waste diversion is definitely more challenging compared to single-family households. So that's an issue that we need to think about. Also, issues due to packaging. A lot of people, when, say, for example, you buy a strawberry and then the strawberry gets moldy and rotten at the end, a lot of people don't want to scrape that out, right? So then they just dump it. So there is this connection between food packaging and making it very difficult for people to actually source, segregate properly. So that's something that we need to think about. And then again, it does not incentivize home reduction. If you see that picture in the bottom, that's South Korea. And South Korea actually has machines where people, individual homeowners, would come and then would actually throw their food waste, but it would get weighed, right? So that encourages prevention and reduction, because if you're going to have to pay extra money for wasting more food, that is tackling the thing that we're not tackling right now. So that's something to So, conclusion. Food waste is a wicked problem. That's why I put that picture of a tangled mess. And if you see my hair under here, it's a tangled mess because this is driving me crazy. But if you look at the scholar Gila, so I think this is a very important thing to think about. Food waste solutions that are limited to innovations in a few sites or in a few countries will likely exacerbate existing inequalities. And I think that's very important because, again, often when we talk about policy, we're doing it in little bits and pieces without really integrating it, like Joyce mentioned. So finally, what I would like to put out a call is a social innovation approach of really breaking the silos and barriers that exist across the food supply chain. So this is a picture of the Food Systems Lab in Toronto. We did a social innovation lab. We brought diverse stakeholders together from large multinational corporations and the representative to very small urban farmers. But what I would like to specifically mention is often a lot of food waste policies are done through consultation, but does not include those who would be affected by these policies. For example, the food bank recipients, right? Or the migrant farm workers, because, by the way, if we're not dealing with this issue, a lot of food will be wasted anyway because we don't have enough labor, or our labor needs to be paid better so that they can work in the farm properly. So again, these types of bringing people together to collaborate on solutions together is very, very important to address food waste in a systemic manner. So, I leave it at that. Thank you so much. And to learn more about my work in the Food Systems Lab, food waste research, or to send lots of questions, you can feel free to jot down my email or follow me on Twitter. Thank you so much.
Well, that was fabulous. Did you learn something from that? Yeah, I certainly did as well. And I know there's a lot of experts in the room. In fact, there are a number of people people who have been working on social innovation solutions to food waste locally. And I just wanted to give the floor to Leonard Shine, who's the chair of Food Stash, which is an organization, a nonprofit that was founded by his son David. So Leonard, would you like to take the mic? And then following that, we'll have questions that you can pose to either of the speakers.
Thank you very much, Joyce. And I really enjoyed your talk here. That was wonderful. Just wanted to mention that here in this riding, there's a charity that started. It's called Food Stash Foundation, and they do two things. One, they deal with food waste and also food insecurity. And they just do fresh foods, no junk foods. And it's fruits, vegetables, bread, milk, cheese, yogurt, eggs, and meat. And they pick them up from local places like Beyond Bread and Top 10 Produce and Terra Breads and Whole Foods. And they deliver to various charities in town which have kitchens like Aboriginal groups and mental health facilities and long-term care facilities, women's shelters. And they also deliver directly to homes. And I've participated in, we're talking about really good food. We're not talking about food that you would even consider waste. And it's really a good organization, and you can also look them up at foodstash.ca. And I noticed we have a few volunteers here in the audience who have volunteered both as donors and as helping pick up food and delivering it to families and to charities. So thank you, and I guess we'll get on to Q&A.
Any community-minded things that Leonard does in Vancouver and Canada, so thanks for that initiative. All right, so question and answer to Tammara. So, Kate, are you going to take the mic? Do you want people to line up, or you just put their hand up?
I think we'll just, we have to be quick this morning. We don't have a lot of time.
Thanks very much. Great talk. My name is Michael. I'm wondering, these charities are great, but they need money. With something like an extended producer responsibility system work for food production, if you've got waste audit studies, you know what types of foods are being wasted?
Yeah, no, that is a very good question, and actually a colleague of mine at U of T is really looking into extended producer responsibility. And for those of you who don't know extended producer responsibility, this is very prevalent in the recycling sector or with electronics, for example, where you can there's like a charge, right, with a particular product. The only thing that's very difficult is obviously with packaging food that might be easier to do with extended producer responsibility, but not necessarily with foods that are not packaged. And another thing is, we know that fruits and vegetables are the basically in terms of the category of food that is wasted, that is the number one category. We are wasting fruits and vegetables at a high amount. So I think the research is starting to talk about there. But again, it's, where are we going to put the burden? And a lot of the produce that we're eating are coming from many parts around the world, and they're basically being gathered together from different small farmers, right, and consolidated. So I think that, again, that supply chain impact has not been studied as much yet. And they're thinking about it.
Thank you very much for your lecture. My name is Chris Finch. Have you done any work correlating waste with where you shop? For example, if you shop at Costco, are you more likely to waste than if you go to the corner store?
Yes, yes. So, Chris, right? Very, very, very good question. So I myself have done studies in Indonesia, and a colleague of mine did a study in South Korea, and what we found was that if you are shopping at the large big box stores, so the big hypermarkets, and you're buying in bulk and stocking up, then there's definitely a correlation with food waste generation. So in my culture, and perhaps, I don't know if this was the case in Canada, people used to buy in small amounts, buy today, eat today. And I think this is also common in a lot of parts of Europe, where people are not stocking up everything like it's going to be the apocalypse tomorrow. But in fact, this is the case. And from a planning perspective, it makes sense that people stock up because the way that we've designed cities have made it very difficult for a lot of people to actually buy in small amounts. You know, like if you're taking like kilometers and driving your car just to get to the grocery store, you don't want to go there every day and just buy in small amounts. So that's a very good question. And yes, in the case of Indonesia and South Korea, there is that correlation, but we have not done that study in Canada.
Hi, Tammara. Thanks again for your presentation. My brother was quite involved with a lot of food hate waste, so needless to say, we had lots of conversations. And one of the things that he came up with that's not really common knowledge is that an event like this that we're at today, where there's a buffet, traditionally what they have to do is they have to make 30 or 40% more food than they expect to eat. Because the last thing they want to do is actually run out of food. So the question is, if there's leftover food from the buffet today, what are they going to do with it? My understanding is that it can't be given to charities because once it's been heated and left warm, it can't be used. So I asked my brother, what do you do? He says he brings Tupperware.
Yes. And Tupperware is a big thing, right? It's probably trademark. I'm probably a big promotional advertisement for a Tupperware lady. Yes. Well, it could be glass. It could be made of glass. Stainless steel. Yeah.
I was wondering if you know what effect the new Canadian diet guideline, what effect you would expect that to have on this issue. And also, you mentioned the Muffin Man. What are the laws about that here in Canada as opposed to in Scandinavia?
That is two good questions. The first question is about, no, it's not the Muffin Man. The first question is
The diet.
The diet, Canada Food Guide. Okay, so the Canada Food Guide is based on increasing plant-based diet, which again, it's wonderful, it's great for the health, but just to remind everyone again that as I mentioned, fruits and vegetables are the #1 wasted category. So if we are buying fruits and vegetables and we are wasting it anyway, it's not meshing. And I think it's easier not to waste food when it has a shelf-stable life. But one particular innovation that I wanted to mention is called BioFresh. It's basically looking at the technology of freeze-drying fruits and vegetables to make sure that so that it is more shelf-stable, so people can have snacks like freeze-dried blueberries, freeze-dried apples, and it would help the farmers because for farmers, when the fruits are a bit wonky or whatever, when you're freeze-dried, it'll all get wrinkly anyway. So in terms of it doesn't matter. But from a nutrition standpoint, it's great. So there are innovations that I think we need to consider. For the Muffin Man case, so the Muffin Man case was actually in Belgium, and I'm not 100% sure what the case is in Canada because in Canada, obviously province to province, city to city, there are different regulations. But in general, yes, that is extremely frowned upon. It's discouraged. In fact, some supermarkets will lock and cage their bins. That was the case with the CBC investigation of Walmart in particular. But if you're talking about small stores and small supermarkets, then they have a little bit more flexibility. And usually they've developed relationships with vegans or dumpster divers, so they would just kind of do it one-on-one without them having to risk their safety or health by jumping into a waste bin.
I think we just have time for two more.
Oh, okay.
I have a question about community focus because I sort of see, and I don't know if you agree with me, that if you start it in the schools, in the school programs, and then work through to community kitchens, that there's a lot of solution there because if children, when they're having their lunches, they know that the food has to be segregated in the garbage at school, and then they plant their own plants and then incorporate it into academic aspects. But is your organization focusing on how to make remedies or just producing reports for people to review?
That is such a beautiful question, and in fact, what you have explained, and what's your name, sorry? Leslie. Leslie, what you explained, Leslie, is basically that closed loop food system, that circular economy that Joyce again mentioned, because that is a more systems perspective. And so the Food Systems Lab, and we will be launching it shortly, we've been working closely with the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, and they work with Environment and Climate Change Canada, and we're developing an action kit that can be used for youth across North America to really engage them and starting to think about food literacy, food waste prevention, cooking, growing your own food. So in fact, I think that will be the future, where we'll have closed loop schools where, you know, there's no such thing as waste. Everything is a resource, everything is used. So that's a great question.
My name is Alexa Patulis, and I'm with Goodly Foods, which is a new social enterprise here in Vancouver. I am thrilled that you are here in Vancouver with us now. Welcome. We want to be part of that conversation about looking at more innovative approaches to really what we call uplifting the food system. So what Goodly Foods does is we are working with local suppliers upstream in that, on that 58, whatever the big percentages, processors, producers, growers, repackers, distributors. We're repurposing vegetables right now, turning it into delicious, hearty soups, and employing people with barriers to traditional employment through a partnership with HAV Culinary Training Society. And we've just launched in our new kitchen in South Vancouver, so we are, please check us out online. Sorry, this is a little public. We're at hellogoodly.ca, because our dream is to actively get our soups, stews, and sauces into public institutions. So we want to be part of the circular economy in schools, at UBC, SFU, hospitals, etc. So let's talk more, and definitely lots of data that needs to be gathered in terms of the producers and what are the innovative solutions. We're basically creating a market for vegetables right now.
And follow Alexa on Twitter, Alexa Patulis, and also check out Goodly Foods. One thing about social enterprise and why it's so important is because we are all innovative. I remember my grandmother and my mother and what she would do with foods, right? With rice that is a bit stale, with bread that is a bit stale. We are all innovative, but we need to really start kind of unpacking that innovation and start again, and supporting social enterprise that really use every single part of the food. It's really a good way to go. So thank you so much for that.
Well, and speaking of intestines, as you did earlier, there's a big opportunity for you to consume and enjoy intestines tomorrow, haggis, because it's Robbie birthday. Haggis at a small function. Tammara, thank you so much. That was incredibly interesting, and we all can see the power of the concepts of the research-based, evidence-based approach that they're contributing here. So we're delighted to have you in Vancouver, and thank you so much. Here's a small food gift. Well, next on my plan was to thank Peggy very much, who owns Aphrodite, for hosting us and doing all this work. And she has packaged up food that they had herself prepared for this morning for you to take away. There will be some takeaway containers at the door, so that food will not go to waste. Thank you, Peggy. I'd like to thank my staff for getting up brutally early on Friday mornings once a month. Thank you, Kaylee, Jonathan, Miranda, and thank you, Eileen Stalker, for your volunteer assistance this morning as well. Our next breakfast is February 15th, and it will be Dr. Max Cameron talking about the rise of populism and democracy in Latin America. So we like to have a very diverse range of public policy issues, and if that's of interest to you, I hope I will see you here on February 15th. And I want to thank you for your participation today and for coming to these breakfasts, because that's what makes them effective and successful. So thank you and have a wonderful Friday.
Thank you.